if you're a fan of superheroes or comic book movies in any way, or even if you're just one who got into it because of the movies, you can't seem to throw a rock in a pond of comic book movies or television without hitting something that talks about multiverse. It's everywhere. That's the big thing. It's even saturated out to other aspects of pop culture, some other movies, some other comic books. It just seems to be seeping into the general public, into the multiverse. The multiverse is expanding into the multiverse. And for comic book readers, people that I assume are probably watching this channel or are bigger fans than just your average Joe, we're used to the multiverse. We know how it operates. We've dealt with it for years, and it doesn't really affect us that much. Now, yes, sometimes comic book companies, Marvel's done it, DC is the big, and I will say, if you've been around my channel, you know I'm a Marvel guy. So this is a little biased, but DC is notorious for creating huge multiverses, causing problems. Crisis, let's do this, and you know, multiverse is a huge, big mess. So yes, it can get confusing even to fans. But just the idea that everything seems to be multiverse anymore. And it did get me thinking that what other things have a multiverse type of idea to them? Sure, we could go as far back, well, we could go all the way back in comics, but we could go to the 90s with the Spider-Man cartoon and the first real Spider-Verse, as people have said. You know, we have Loki now, we have just so much has come and gone. But that's not what this video is about. We're talking about Power Rangers. Now, Power Rangers has done its own multiverse thing, and I believe, being a fan, now I could be wrong, I believe the first real mention of alternate dimensions we had was in Dimensions of Danger, which would have been the 25th anniversary special of Power Rangers. Now, we also have the comics, which have acknowledged there's a multiverse out there. The comics are their own universe. Our TV show is their own universe. The Dino Charge is its own universe. RPM is its own universe. So, off the top of my head, like I said, I can't remember which came first, if it was Dimensions of Danger or the comic books. So, don't get too mad at me, fans, that if I got that wrong. I do apologize if I did. But, all that being said, what am I trying to get across? Well, if you clicked on this video, which obviously you did, and if you read the title, then you know what I wanted to talk about. Now, huge fans of Power Rangers have been fans for over 30 years. Well, correction, for 30 years, since last month, as I put up on Power Ranger Day, was the 30th anniversary of the Day of the Dumpster. Those of us who have been fans that long and have dug into the lore, the myths within the stories, that might not be the right wording, but who've dug into the background, into behind the scenes, who have, you know, watched behind the scenes featurettes and everything, know about a little thing called the Power Rangers Unaired pilot episode. Now, this is something that I believe only die-hard fans really know about. Others have heard about it, but they don't give it any thought, and others just don't know about it at all. So I rewatched the pilot, and I wanted to talk about it because with everything multiverse going on, rewatching this does lend to the question, what would our universe have been like if this was the actual pilot for Power Rangers? Would it still be as popular as it is? Who knows? Because that's not what happened in our universe. But maybe in the multiverse out there, this was the actual pilot for Power Rangers. So, with this video, with it being the 30th anniversary, let's take a look back at this unaired Power Rangers pilot and just talk about some of the good things about it, some of the bad things, and there's plenty of it. And, maybe speculate a little bit about what could have been if this was the actual first episode. So, for Fandom University and the 30th anniversary celebration of Power Rangers, this is Unedited Reviews for Power Rangers, the unaired pilot. So right off the bat, I'm going to say this is not a watch and react video. Big reason, I don't know how to do that type of video. But also, I just wanted to talk about this episode. The one or two good things, the things that were different, maybe things that just didn't work at all for me. And then think a little bit, like I said, about what if this had actually been the first episode. So starting off with the one or two big things that I actually liked about this episode. I thought this episode did a really good job, or at least a much better job than the one we actually got, talking about why these teens were chosen to be Rangers. Now, yes, in the actual pilot, we do get brief mentions as to why they were chosen. For example, when talking to Billy, he said Zordon, or Zoltar as he's in this one, says wisdom, and I think he says wisdom and smart. I admit I couldn't remember that. But he says that's why you're the Triceratops. Which does beg the question, which you never think about this as a kid. What does brains have to do with a Triceratops? Just, what does it have to do? Or Kimberly, he says, graceful and agile. You shall be the pterodactyl. The pterodactyl dinosaurs shall be under your control. Again, what does that stuff have to do with the pterodactyl? Again, things you don't think of as a kid. But now it's like, well, why is that exactly? And that's basically all we get. We never really get a good explanation as to what attributes they have that make them be these Rangers or this team. Now, as the series progresses, we get a little bit more. We have some character growth for them. By season 2, there's a lot more overall. But just in that first episode, we don't get really as much understanding about why these 5. It almost just seems by chance. And in this unaired pilot, we do get a little bit more. Granted, it's not much. I mean, it still doesn't make a lot of sense why Billy is a Triceratops, why Kimberly is a pterodactyl, why Trini is a saber-tooth. It still doesn't make total sense, but there's a little bit more to it. And then at the end of the episode, we do get a better, or a little bit more from Zoltar. Again, Zordon as we know him. That explains why each of them was actually chosen. We get a little flashback to earlier in the episode. And an example of this is we flat out hear him tell Jason, you're a leader. Something about leadership skills and stuff. That's why you're chosen to be the Red Ranger. And we get that for each of the Rangers. Now, granted, it's still not a lot. And it definitely could have been done better. But it's more than we get in the actual Day of the Dumpster first episode. And that, thinking back on it, that's the big thing that the episode we got, the aired version, is missing. Now, I do actually also like the beginning of this episode a little bit, because what it does is, instead of starting off on the moon with Rita, we first meet our gang, our group of heroes, who of course at this point are not heroes yet. And they seem to interact more, not just with each other, but they interact more with just teenagers their own age, kids their own age. Is it a great scene? No. It's still not as good, in my opinion, as their introduction in the actual pilot. But it is interesting, and I feel like this actually worked. again, this is one of those moments, the good things in this episode, if you had melded the unaired with the aired, these few items, I think that episode could have been even better than we remember as kids. Again, is it actually as good as we remember? Well, that's up for you to decide to rewatch it. That's up for me to decide to rewatch it again. But I did kind of like that aspect of it. But now we move on to the area of things that just, honestly, just didn't really work for me. And there's a lot of differences, and there's a lot of things that we can point out now, saying, oh, that doesn't work because of this. But it does kind of beg the question, would they have worked if they kept going with it? So the big things right off the bat, Zordon being called Zoltar. It's not a huge thing, but it's a weird, you just hear Zordon for 30 years. Hearing the new name Zoltar just doesn't really work. Alpha's look, yeah, no, the one we got worked much better. It looks much more, I don't want to say robotic, because this one looks more robotic. But when Billy says a fully sentient multi-something automaton, a bunch of science words, I feel like that works better with the Alpha we got than this original one. Also going back, almost forgot, while we're on Zoltar and Alpha, the command center. Yeah, it doesn't even look remotely as good as we got later on. Now, I'm sure that was probably due to a budgetary restraint. That was probably what you got for the budget at the time, since this was a pilot episode. But still, there's like nothing to it. The one we got, even though it was simple, really, compared to later bases and stuff, still looked a whole lot better than this one does. There is a scene where we don't have the viewing globe. Instead, it's holograms and projections up beside Zoltar. That could have been cool, because we did get that type of thing later on in Zeo, and I think Turbo as well. But I like the viewing globe. I like getting that. I'm glad that we had that instead of always having it up on the projections. Then the question would be like, well, where's it coming from? What's going on? But going back to the beginning, it's in a bowling alley. We don't have Ernie's juice bar. We don't have that iconic set. And honestly, the Rangers the Rangers bowling, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel the same. I mean, yes, they're supposed to be teenagers. Teenagers go bowling. Teenagers have fun. But I feel like we don't really get the introduction to the Rangers that we get with the juice bar. Now, I did mention how in neither one we really get or understand why they were chosen to be the Rangers they were chosen, or what it has to do with their Zords. But at least in the actual pilot, we saw Jason leading a karate class, which showed that he was a leader and he knew good karate. We had Billy spouted off scientific terms when they got to the command center, which helped to show he was smart. And then, of course, back in the day, the glasses helped showing he was a nerd and not really getting karate. But it also helped establish that relationship between Jason and Billy would have growth through the series. We saw Kimberly as a gymnast, which would be a major thing later on in the series. And we don't get any hints of that here. I mean, we don't even really see... I feel like it's not the same character there. Yes, Amy Jo's humor is the same, as some people have pointed out, but that's Amy Jo. That's not the character. Then Trini, yeah. I mean, the original actress who played Trini her name, I'm probably going to butcher it, Audrey Dubois. She was good. She was good as Trini, but I think just, it's not the same Trini. Because here she's just sitting beside Billy, like learning, I guess, taking in his scientific talk, or, you know, if you do this, this is how the ball will go, you know. And I mean, this definitely, I feel like, made Billy much more of a nerd than the actual pilot did. And I liked that the actual one made him a nerd, but it didn't feel as much as this one does. Trini to me is the most different, because at the juice bar you see her doing, I think it's Tai Chi, you see her doing a type of martial art. Here, again, like I said, she's just listening. I mean, we do understand that she's smart to a certain degree, but I just feel like we get a slightly better version of Trini in the actual pilot that we got. I already talked about Billy. Zach is the one that's the most similar through the whole thing. You know, fun-loving. Hey guys, yeah, cool. You know, he is the one that pretty much stayed the same between both versions. Then, of course, you got the big difference between Bulk and Skull. About Bulk is not Bulk. Skull is not Skull. Like, Skull is the smart one. Bulk is the dumb one. Then they flip that on its head. And honestly, one or two of them, I think Skull actually seemed more like a bully here than in the pilot. And you get more of a crew for them in this one than you did in the pilot, the actual pilot. The voices of Squadron Babu, moving on to the villains. Yeah, definitely didn't work for me. It's interesting that some of the different footage they used from Zoo Ranger in this version. The teleportation sequence, yeah, 100 times better in what we got. Here it's just, oh look, our body's stretching and we're going. Compared to the actual aired version that was, you know, shaking. And I always felt like the teleportation kind of held them in place. That's why they didn't run out. It kind of held them in place, and then they just, you could see them changing the color to teleport. I like that better than this teleportation. This one just having the body stretch and go doesn't work, especially if they're going like one at a time compared to having them all go at once. The first fight with the putties, similar, but it feels much more. This one you can tell it's like, oh, now get thrown over there. Oh, now actually you're thrown out. It feels much more acted and waiting for the next line or the next direction. It doesn't feel like it flows as well as the actual pilot does. The morphing sequence. I mean, there's also, Zach's like, yeah, I'm going to go get these two. And then he just starts doing the hip hop keto, which it's cool to get that sooner. But he's like, yeah, I got these two. Boom, boom. It just doesn't. Is Power Rangers dumb overall? Yes. Is it cheesy overall? Yes. But this just was like, what's going on? Now, I know something kind of similar. I know some similar stuff happens in the actual aired version, but it flows better. I think that's the biggest thing. This pilot doesn't flow as well as the actual one does. I could probably summarize everything that I'm talking about up in that simple fact. The actual pilot flows a lot better, looks a lot smoother than this one does. And then you got the first morphing sequence. I feel like they're part of this that could have worked if you had combined it again with the one we actually got. I don't think I hate this morphing sequence as much as a lot of people do, because I like them each getting their own moment. But I think what would have made it even better, if you're going to do that, then you do what we got, because that looks just fantastic. It's memorable. It feels like power. But you show them each individual morph, like we've gotten now in newer or an anniversary, like once a Ranger. In that, we got to see the energy come out of the Morpher, and in case the guys and gals in their color energy and they became the Ranger. If they had done something like that with this morph in the unaired version, it would have been fine. But just the way they just had them pterodactyl, triceratops, saber-toothed tiger, it doesn't work. It just doesn't feel as good as the actual first episode. Then we get into the whole Zoo Ranger footage, and it's just, they don't talk. There's like no voiceover, with like one or two exceptions. And then 1 minute, Goldar's here. Next minute, he's up there. Then you got King Sphinx over here as their villain, first villain. And it just moves. But it moves and it feels choppy. Like I said, that's the big difference between, for me, why the unaired version doesn't work, but the actual one does. The actual one, the choppiness, it doesn't feel like it's choppy. It flows well. And I feel like as a kid, you don't really realize that there's a difference. Unless you're a really, really smart kid, which I wasn't, and I didn't pick up on that. It just flowed better. This one, it didn't. So you get the Megazord, you get that scene, and all that stuff still is pretty much the same. But again, what more can I say instead of it just doesn't flow well? It's choppy. It just doesn't feel as solid as the actual pilot. And then the way this episode ends, yeah, it works. It's fine. We get similar stuff. Kimberly has a different type of way to say her hair's messed up in the helmet, and getting a joke there. There's a little bit more explanation, like I mentioned earlier, about stuff. But yeah, it ends. So overall, this episode definitely feels, I would say this almost feels more like a pilot episode than that first one. And I guess I could have saved a lot of people a lot of time if I just said biggest difference, and the main reason why I think the actual one is better than this one, moves better. I think the dialogue's better in that one overall. The look of it's better, and it's less choppy. Probably going to save people at least 15 minutes if I just did that. But let's quickly think about this. In this multiverse of ours, what if this was the first episode? What if this was actually the first episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? Honestly, I don't think it would have lasted. I don't think we would be talking about it 30 years later. I mean, I think it still would have been popular. I think you still would have had kids interested in it. I think there's a lot of potential here that you could have built on, and you could have made things better. I mean, if you upgraded everything from this pilot for the rest of this season, it would have worked. I do think, obviously, the majority of the actors are the same, so they obviously worked. And I think that Audrey Dubois, she would have worked if things had been different. But we all love the Trini we got. We all love Trini Tang. May she rest in peace. We love what we got. But honestly, I don't know. I don't think it would have lasted the 30 years that it has if this was the first episode. We might have gotten a full season. We might have gotten the 60 episodes. We might have gotten a second season. But I also feel like they might have tried something different. As they did going on to other teams, other groups, other mentors. I feel like they might have tried something different a lot sooner. We might have gotten the Die Ranger suits, where the White Ranger came from. We might have gotten that group of that team's suits. That could have been the second season. But like I said, I don't think it would have been as popular. I think it would have been something that kids who grew up with it would have liked, but I think it would have died out after that instead of keep going. It might, if it had kept going, it probably would have stopped after Space. It might have actually stopped after Space. Heck, it might have stopped after Turbo. But I don't see it lasting as long as it has. This pilot is an interesting piece of Ranger history. And it's definitely something I highly recommend any Ranger fan who hasn't watched it watches it, so that they can appreciate what we actually got more. Or if you have watched it, watch it again. It'll put a smile on your face. But yeah, definitely would have been a much different Ranger history if this had been the actual pilot. But now it's your turn. Have you watched this pilot? If so, what are your thoughts on it? Am I completely off track? Do you actually think this was a better episode than what we got? But the big question I have for you is, what do you think would have happened if this was the actual episode that we got to start the whole series? Would things be the way they are now? Would it have ended, died right there? Obviously, somebody thought it would have because they changed it. But what are your thoughts on this episode? Let me know down below in the comments. And don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And remember to read what you love, enjoy what you love, and let's all work for a better fandom. And may the power protect you all. I'll see you next time.